Welcome to Gracefully Graying Livestream. Gracefully Graying is a startup to connect you to resources and information about growing older and for assisting your loved ones. We provide articles, interviews, checklists, and other tips to create a productive and vibrant life. We also have many resources for people moving into later life stages and how they can be helped by those around them. You can find us on gracefullygraying.com and social media platforms. So now enjoy the live stream Gracefully Graying show.
Welcome. I am your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, we will be discussing a very important topic as to how we recognize and deal with cognitive disorders as we are aging with my guest, Alyssa Tobias. Alyssa, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Henry.
Oh, it's a pleasure. First of all, why don't you tell a little bit about your background and what you're doing at the present time?
Sure. It's a pleasure. Well, first of all, I'm an incredibly proud grad of the University of Michigan class of 95 School of Social Work, where it all started. And for the last 25 years, I basically worked in every facet of the aging field. So I have worked in independent living, assisted living, memory care. I've worked for the Alzheimer's Association part-time. I also started my career at Hospice of Michigan. So I've really run the gamut of every experience someone can have working in the aging field.
And what is your current job description?
So right now, my current job, I'm the independent living manager at Waltonwood of 12 Oaks. What does that mean? I oversee an entire community of incredible residents as they age. So my responsibility here is to make sure their needs are met in every way, whatever that means: crisis intervention, dealing with transitional care, helping them with their coffee. It doesn't matter. It runs the gamut of whatever their needs are.
How large is the community there?
Well, we have three parts of our community. We are a continuum of care. So I oversee the independent living community, and we have about roughly around 100 residents on my side of the community. We have assisted living, roughly anywhere between 40 and 50. And we also have our memory care, which is much smaller, which is around 20.
If you suspect that a loved one is becoming cognitively impaired, what is the first sign to look for, Alyssa?
Well, there's a lot of things to look for. And the first thing people should know is you're not alone, because nobody ages the same and everyone's going to age differently. So the first thing we're going to look for is repetition. When you're talking to your loved one, are they saying the same thing over and over again? And then kind of acknowledging it, saying, I'm so forgetful. I don't know where I put my head. That is the first sign. They're acknowledging that they're having some forgetfulness. When we forget our appointments, when we forget hanging out with our friends or canceling appointments or not wanting to be in social situations, when we start losing our memory where we're going, or we're driving and forget the directions and where we're going. These are little things that start that we have clues to. That's when we start having these conversations.
What about losing things such as keys, phones, books, which I'm guilty of, quite frankly?
Me too. We all are. And as we age, over the age of 65, most of us will get something called MCI. That's mild cognitive impairment. That happens as we age because things happen to our brain. So there's a difference between having mild cognitive impairment and showing signs of forgetfulness, like losing our keys, like not being able to remember where our phone is, the clicker for the TV. Those little things that are happening that are causing us anxiety and stress more than normal, those are the first things that we're looking for.
What about physical signs?
Wonderful question. So that would be the second thing. When you go to visit your loved one, whether it be a parent, a grandparent, it doesn't matter, your aunt, you're going to do some investigating without them knowing, because the most important thing at the end of the day is that we have our dignity. It doesn't matter what stage of life we're in, but we want to make sure we're not looking at them like we're judging them, but we're there to help. So what I do when I'm kind of doing my investigation is I'm going to go in the bathroom first. Why am I going to do that? Because that's where our grooming takes place. And when we have cognitive issues, the the first thing that usually happens is we're not caring for ourselves. So I'm looking at their toothbrush to see if it's actually been used or if there's even a tube of toothpaste nearby. Grooming is a first sign when we don't brush our hair, or if gentlemen stop shaving, or ladies don't get their hair done, or they don't know where their hairbrush is. And then some of the more embarrassing things like toileting issues. So these are the first things we hide. So these are the reasons we go in the bathroom first. Just say we need to use the restroom, and that's really a telltale sign of what's going on.
Are there any other rooms in the house that could be looked at?
Every room in the house. So the kitchen is the second area I'd be looking at.
Okay.
And if you feel that you have a loved one who might be using their stove in a dangerous way, we unplug them. And we tell them we're going to unplug them without making it an embarrassing situation. We realized you left the teapot on, it burned the stove, and just for your safety, we're going to figure out a better way to help you cook. So instead of taking that privilege away, we're going to give something back. Let's get a newer microwave or a toaster that has something that won't set the apartment or house on fire, because people acknowledge that they're forgetful and they're doing things and they don't want to be embarrassed by them. So they just want us to help them navigate that journey with dignity.
What about physical appearance? Are there any physical signs to look at on the person himself or herself?
Anyone who is proud of their appearance, which is most of my people that I work with on a daily basis. So I can tell within a week when something's going on, whether it be a urinary tract infection, whether they're coming down with a cold. You can tell by hair, face, clothing. Most times when people are starting to get confused, they're wearing the wrong clothing for the wrong season. Sometimes they're forgetting pieces of clothing, wearing clothing inside out. So when we see this happening, we don't want to draw attention in a negative way, because we already know that there's embarrassment that goes. So when we're in a private area, we may want to make a joke and say, you know what, Mom, I think the tag's showing. We might just want to fix that, because we don't want to say, oh my gosh, your clothes are inside out. That's going to trigger some anxiety. So we really just want people to feel comfortable with the aging process, because it's going to happen to all of us.
What about weight loss or signs physically in addition?
So when we get impaired, time is of the essence, because we don't have time frame anymore. Sometimes we wake up in the morning and we think it's dinner time, or vice versa, or we don't remember eating at all. So when you notice weight loss, we get into that immediately. So family members, instead of saying, oh my gosh, you're not eating, what's going on? I go with people to the grocery store with our loved one and say, you know what, these protein drinks, if you're not going to eat a meal and sometimes you forget, have one of these. I'm going to keep the chocolate on the top, the strawberry here. We help them with that so that it's not embarrassing, but yet they can still get the nutritional support, because it's very easy to have a protein drink and see that in the fridge, or have someone give a cue or reminder to call. It's much easier to do that than try to remember to have a meal or say you didn't eat, because most people live independently until they have to make a transition into a senior community or something else.
What are the average ages at your community?
Wow. Well, I think my youngest resident moved out for different reasons, was 58, and my oldest resident just turned 102.
It's a wide gamut, obviously.
It's a wide gamut. I would say the average age in most communities in Michigan, because there's a difference between retirement communities in Michigan and retirement communities in Florida. So that retirement communities in Florida are people between 55 and 75 that are having an alternative lifestyle. And here in Michigan, when we're talking about senior retirement and senior living, we're looking at a much older population that are looking for more of a retirement experience. I like to say that, rather than retiring at a community somewhat in Florida. They're very different.
Okay, Alyssa, you've seen signs in a person that he or she is becoming cognitively impaired. What do you do? How do you tell a family member? How do you tell the person? What are some techniques that should be employed in this area?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I would do is have a meeting with the family privately to help them navigate how to talk to their loved one, because we don't know how to deal with this until we've never had an aging parent until our parent ages, or a loved one. So how would we know how to have these conversations? So the first thing I would do is I sit down with families and I say, okay, these are the realities of what's going on. We're going to have an honest conversation with your loved one. And we kind of script it out and say, who wants to talk? Who wants to be the listener? And how do we get the message across with dignity? I use that word a lot because as we age, these are the most important things that people don't talk about. We want to be independent. We want to preserve that as long as we can. So once we've met as a family and decided the game plan, we're now going to sit down with our loved one and say, we love you. We want to have an honest conversation with you. Because in my opinion, we always are honest, because if we lie, the trust is gone. So if it's someone who's mildly impaired and maybe they're forgetting things, missed an appointment, drove to the wrong location, we're going to sit down and say, Mom, we are concerned. We want to just have an open conversation because we know you've been telling us you've been a little forgetful. What can we as a family do to help you? That's one way to start a conversation. I'm going to backtrack for a second. We should have these conversations with our loved ones at a much earlier time. And we don't know that because no one tells us that. So I tell my friends, so I just turned 54, but I tell people that are a little younger than me, once you get married and you start having kids, when your parents are at that age where they're starting to help you and they are cognitively with it and they understand everything, that is the time to have these conversations about what they want when they age. What kind of experience do they want? Do they want to live in a community? Do they want to live in an apartment with some assistance? Everyone has different needs. So we want to navigate that to the best of their ability for what our loved one, we know them better than anyone. Are they shy? Will they thrive in a community such as mine? Or would it be better for them to be by themselves for a while and figure out their situation? So it really depends on the person, but honesty is the first thing in involving them in choice. Because the first thing a person says when you have this conversation is, you're not putting me in one of those places, defense immediately. And I hear it every time. And we don't put people places. We make a transition to our next home where we're going to age. So that's how we have those conversations, because language is very important when we're talking to our family member.
Alyssa, who should be involved in these conversations? I'm thinking of the fact that, you might have both parents are still alive, for example. You might have children. You might have grandchildren already. Who should be involved? There might be several siblings. And also you might have the dynamics where different members have different ideas as to what's best for mom or dad. And often you're mediating very diverse views, I'm sure.
Wow, that is the number one thing. And everyone has an opinion and everyone thinks they're right. So we start with that right away. So when I navigate, we don't want 50 million people in there. We want maybe a few siblings. It doesn't have to be all the siblings. And perhaps the siblings that are the ones that deal hands-on, or that your family feels close to, that they can confide in, or a grandchild, or maybe a best friend who might be a physician, someone that they trust. Because when you have this conversation, no matter how we slice it, they're going to be embarrassed and they're going to feel like we're coming at them or attacking them, or why is this happening? So we want to make sure the people we bring into this are the people we trust the most. And I wouldn't have more than a few people there, because it changes the dynamic of how we have a conversation.
Is it important to have someone such as yourself involved in some of these conversations? I mean, it's a difficult topic. I mean, there's certain taboos. I'm thinking of, families don't like to talk about money, and these
I'd like to say that I'm the proclaimed bad guy, but I'm good at it. So I don't want families to feel like they're in the position to say, this is what you need. So the first thing I would tell families when they are realizing this impairment is to go to your general practitioner with your loved one and say, can I come with you just so I can take notes? I want to see what's going on so we can all be on the same page. Once you hear from that doctor, who hopefully will do some form of mini mental to test their cognition and see their physicality and all those other things, the doctor might recommend with your family member there, maybe now's the time to start navigating alternative living situations. Then you're hearing that and you can take that back to the family. And then we start talking about independent living or communities, which of course, 90% of the time, not doing that. Resistance is the number one thing. And we can't blame people for that, because who wants to be told it's time to move unless it's our decision, right? No one wants anyone telling them how to live their life, especially when we do the life cycle. When our children start telling parents what to do, it also changes how we feel and how they feel.
These are difficult questions, and, you're answering them beautifully. You mentioned a first step is going to someone's internist, general practitioner. Is this where treatment should start? If there's definitely a diagnosis, or should be a diagnosis of, let's call it Alzheimer's or dementia or some type of cognitive impairment that cannot be ignored.
So after we do this general practitioner, my hope is that they're going to say, if they see the impairment, which they should, and a mini mental, or even asking certain questions and asking a few minutes later to repeat a certain amount of things, you will know. When you ask date, time, and place, and they don't know that, and they get tricky, oh, well, it's Thursday. I'm so forgetful. No, we know, and they should send you to a neurologist if they think it's more than mild, so that they can get a diagnosis. And what people also need to understand is it's just not dementia. Dementia's a hub word, like truck. What kind of truck is it? So there's different forms of dementia under that hub. So there's Alzheimer's, there's Lewy body, there's different forms. So not everyone's cognition is going to happen the same or change the same depending on that diagnosis.
What about the fact that everyone ages differently?
This is the biggest challenge, I think, for most children, grandchildren, because one parent or grandparent may have had Alzheimer's and they had to deal with them in one way, and another parent might be physically impaired, and sometimes they live together in this situation. So you're dealing with two facets of two crazy situations at the same time. So when we are dealing with this, again, I go back to honesty, that we just want to have these conversations and ask our loved one how we can bring them into this, because the fact of the matter is we are all going to age, and we're all going to have to make a transition. We can't live in our home, our apartment into our 80s and 90s as much as we might think we are able to and are capable to, just like we all think we can drive until we're 90. It's a safety issue. It's not a cognition issue. And I try explaining that to my residents, who I love like they're my own, because it's not personal. It's about what's happening to your body and being safe on the road.
Alyssa, tell us about the lost generation without support. Exactly what does that mean?
Wow. I mean, I think for me, the biggest privilege of working in this field is working with the greatest generation that ever lived. So this generation that I have the privilege of working with is kind of lost, because their children and grandchildren are baby boomers. They're the people that are taking care of their grandchildren and taking care of their aging parent. So somewhere in the mix, these seniors are kind of getting lost in the shuffle, because their children are now helping their children take care of their kids. Things are very different now. And it's also a financial thing too, because the people I work with, they are the pension generation. So we're going to have a whole other evolution of a problem in about 10 years when the baby boomers need this kind of service, because financially it's incredible. It's a very big financial burden to age that no one tells you about either.
Something to look forward to, I guess.
Sorry. I mean, I try to prepare people, because as we age, and when I say people age differently, when we require more care, whether it be assisted living or memory care, I don't think people understand the cost that is involved. It's astronomical. So these conversations are so important to navigate so early when our parents are aging in their 70s or their late 60s, because we want to honor their wishes. And because we don't know how they're going to age, and if they have dementia, some form of that, we want to ask them in the present what they want, where they want to live. Would they want to be in a communal setting? If they have the resources, would they want to be in their setting around the clock, which I don't recommend, by the way. But it's better to me be amongst others when you're aging, to have that companionship. That's my opinion.
Wow. Alyssa, how do we go about problem solving in this important area? I mean, you're bringing up a lot of points. There are a lot of issues, but you know, it's a bigger and bigger problem. I mean, the baby boomers are tremendous. I mean, when you're looking at 50 and over, it's the largest demographics in our country.
Yeah.
And I don't think people recognize it. I don't think our country deals with it.
Not even a little bit. Not only do we not deal with it, I think there's such a stigma with aging, and we don't address it because we're fearful of the unknown. And I bring these real topics to people because we have to talk about them. In my community, we talk about death and dying. We talk about what that feels like because it's scary. And when people move here, the honest conversation I have is welcome to your new home. And we talk about it, and I say, I hope this is the last place you live before you die. And we're honest about it because we don't want people to have to transition. But if they do, this is what I'm here for. I help families navigate that journey, whether it be assisted living, whether it be memory care, or whether it be skilled, needing something more physical. So we need to have these honest conversations to get the ball rolling, because if we don't, there's going to be a whole generation coming up that isn't going to know not only what to do with their parents who are living longer, because what I'm seeing is this generation is living well into their late 80s, mid 90s. I've had in my community alone 4 people that were over 100 that lived independently, I may add. So that to me is a sign that we are in big trouble if we don't start navigating the financial aspect, what's going to happen to the people coming up who are aging, and how are we going to help support them? Because you're 100% right. Our government is so busy doing other things that they forgot, and they're going to be there too. A lot of them are, that we have to take care of each other, because there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are not going to have their Social Security or their Medicare or Medicaid, because everyone's going to be on that, and there's not going to be beds or housing available for people that are financially strapped in that way.
What are some next steps once there's a diagnosis? I mean, it's like, I guess we could talk about many times. And really, one of the purposes that we started and created Gracefully Graying, which is a dynamic and organic entity from our perspective, is to have these conversations, to explore these issues. We want more conversations. We want Gracefully Graying to be the hub, the community, to look at all of these issues that we face as we're getting older, from the mental health, the physical health, assisted living, senior residence, economic, legal, medical, everything. So what are next steps once there is a diagnosis
So
who is impaired?
once there's a diagnosis and a doctor or professional says it's time to make a transition, then families start doing their research. So in Michigan, in Oakland County, here alone, there are more senior living communities, retirement communities, assisted living, memory care, rehabilitation facilities. We are inundated with them like Starbucks, and it's really true. So once we get that diagnosis, we're going to start our research, and we're going to think of we're going to look at what our socioeconomic situation is, what our finances are, what we can afford. That's going to dictate where we're going to look. And so once we get that diagnosis, we're going to tell our family member, okay, if you're not into looking for a community right now or an alternative living situation, we're just going to start the process. It might be a little overwhelming for you, but involve your loved one, because don't do it behind their back without their knowledge. If they don't want to be involved right away, that is okay. But we don't ever want to lie to them, because the last thing you want to do is spring to someone, you know what, I just put down a deposit at this great community, and they're going to be, what? You didn't involve me? So being open and honest, that's the first thing. And then you start looking at your budget and what would be best fitting. Is your family member ready for independent living? What does that mean? They can live independently, tenant leasing relationship with a lot of amenities. So in my community, I oversee all the independent living. That means everyone here should be able to live and do their activity of daily livings all by themselves, come and go as they please. Now, if they can't do that and they live independently, we have things in our building called a la carte services, which we can help with. And that's something private, where we can help with medication, which is very important. Med reminders are incredibly important for seniors, or helping in the bathroom with shower assists, because people don't leave my community for heart attack, stroke, or any of those things. People leave here because they have not taken their medication appropriately, or they are not wearing their security pendant, around their wrist or their hand and they fall in the shower. And that is why people leave. So these are the reasons people are going to be moving to my community anyways. It's not that they can't be independent. They just need independence with some lots of lovely services, activities, transportation, and meals to make their life easier.
Alyssa, before we sign off, what are some takeaways that you would like to share with our viewers?
Wonderful. So the first thing is when you are having this conversation with your loved one, be really cognizant of the fact that they will be resistant and you're coming at a place of love. That's the first thing. We're not having this conversation to make anyone defensive. It's just caring, and we want them to know that we're looking out for their best interest. Everyone ages, and at some point we need to make a change. That's the number one. Number two, not everybody ages the same. So if you're having concerns or questions, reach out to a geriatric specialist or social worker like myself. There are different agencies. You can Google them and find people that know what they're talking about that aren't just salespeople, because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where someone's just looking to sell you something. You want to look at something that's the most appropriate thing for your loved one and where they can live and thrive. So that's number two. Number three, we have to make sure when we make that decision, we're in the appropriate living situation. That's the number one mistake that happens with most people. A family will go into a doctor and say, my mom wants to live independently. The doctor will sign off and say, okay, without asking the appropriate questions. So then they come to me, and then I'm the toughie who says, nope, I think you need to go back and ask them this to make sure they can live independently. The last thing you ever want to do is move someone into an independent living situation and then have to transition them a month or two later to an assisted living. So I'm really clear with people and very honest, because assisted living is living independently with perks, just a few more perks. So we want to make sure people are living in the right environment. And those are the things people really need to take away from this conversation. And then when the time is right is before the time is right. You have those conversations early on when your parents really can understand and make those decisions with you.
Alyssa Tobias, these are such important topics and thoughts. We've barely scratched the surface, but I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
This is great, and we're going to have further conversations.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. And thank you again for having me here with you.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest, and I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. This is such an important topic. Please share it with your loved ones, and thank you again.
Thank you.